Oh, I switched my camera off.
Hello everyone who's already here. We'll be starting in the next minute or two. We're just going to wait for a few more people to join the feed and we will begin. Okay, for those of you who didn't just hear that, we'll start in 1 minute. We're just going to wait for a few more people to join and then we will get started with today's webinar. Lovely, just a few more seconds. Give you until 2 past. Make sure we've got as many people on here as possible and we'll get started. Okay, let's begin. Hello everyone. I hope the weather is okay where you are. It's very grey and boring in Buckinghamshire where I am. Welcome to today's free Foothold webinar, and I'm Catherine Drake. I'm the Communications and Digital Events Officer at Foothold, and this is going to be the second webinar I'm doing. I've been here for almost 3 months now, and so I'm excited to be closing 2023 with my second webinar here. I'm joined today by Katie Cullen-Birtwistle. She is a psychotherapist, counsellor, mediator and wellbeing trainer. And those of you who've been to a Foothold webinar before will probably recognise her. She speaks on all sorts of subjects, mental health and wellbeing related. And after Katie has done her presentation, she will be joined in conversation with her colleague Claire Wernham-Fellows. They'll be discussing some of the ways that conflict resolution techniques we've discussed can be used in practice. Claire is an executive coach and mental health and wellbeing expert. She's passionate about self-care and living a happy, healthy life. So I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation and seeing the discussion today. It's a very popular subject, lots of sign-ups for today's webinar, which is very exciting. So I hope everyone gets a lot out of it, and yeah, lots of practical and actionable advice coming your way. So today's webinar is about resolving work-related conflict. Conflict is a natural facet of any relationship, whether it's a personal romantic relationship, whether it's a work relationship. And I think the first thing I want to say is that conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. I think people who are natural people pleasers or conflict averse can believe that conflict is a sign that something has gone wrong in a relationship or a situation. And it's so often not the case. It is so incredibly natural. It is, however, something that needs to be navigated with the interests of both parties in mind. So that's what we'll be looking at today. And when handled correctly, conflict can really strengthen a relationship going forwards, and both parties can have a much clearer idea of what each other's boundaries are. And I think that's very healthy in a relationship. So our free webinar today will explore conflict in the workplace specifically, from the types of conflict you may encounter to its impact on individuals and the wider organisation. If any of the subject matter that we're discussing today is a bit close to home, a bit uncomfortable for you, I just want to let you know that it's very important and necessary that you look after yourself and your own mental health. If you want to take a break and revisit the content later, we will send out the link to receive the recording of this webinar after the session, so you can watch it back at your leisure if you're not able to watch it all now. So do what you need and look after you. So before I start before the webinar gets started, I will tell you a little bit about Foothold and who we are and what we do. So we are Foothold, supporting engineers. We have been supporting engineers and their families since 1890, so that's 133 years this year, to ensure that no engineer or their family needs to face life's challenges without support. We know that life can be unpredictable, and in the busyness of our lives, we can often forget that being well is just as important as doing well. We are funded by engineers for engineers, and Foothold is a starting point, giving engineers the tools they need to make their lives better right now. Next slide, lovely. So we offer all kinds of support in the form of grants, befriending services, all manner of ways. We offer financial help, health and well-being, legal issues, care and disability support, work-life help, neurodiversity and housing. And we are partnered with a lot of other great charities, including Anxiety UK, Shelter. We also have connections to legal specialists who can help our engineering community with any issues that they may have to ensure that they get the support they need with their situation. We also have digital support, which is where I come in as the comms and digital person. Our digital health and wellbeing support allows us to reach many more people than we can through our direct support alone. So this includes things like today, our free webinar programme, expert blogs that appear on our website, the Foothold app, which provides financial and legal support and is free to download for anyone. The Wellbeing Hub, which gives advice and support on physical and mental health, and the Differently Wired Hub, which is part of our neurodiversity package of support, and it offers information and advice on neurodiverse conditions, and also signposts to further support if you're looking to seek a diagnosis and things like that. So lots of helpful resources on our website there. At this stage, we would also ask if you would consider making a donation today so that we can continue to help our engineering community. This webinar is brought to you free today thanks to generous donations and gifts in wills from engineers and their families. So we ask that you would consider making a donation via our website to help us continue be there for engineers when they need us most. We're in a bit of a challenging spot as a charity at the moment. Some of you may know we're a charity that is independent of the IET, but we do support IET members and the wider engineering community as well. In the past, IET members would have donated as part of their membership renewal. It was a £25 donation per year. And as of this year, as of the 1st of October of this year, this is no longer possible. The IET is no longer able to collect donations for Foothold through their annual membership renewals. So what this means is that we've lost quite a bit of generous donations and income from that. So if you haven't donated this year and feel like you would like to help us and support our work and what we do, a donation of anything you can give would be fantastic. So we're encouraging our community to donate direct with the hashtag donate direct is what our appeal is about. And you can go to myfoothold.org/donate direct to find out more and kindly donate. Thank you. So without much further ado, enjoy today's Foothold webinar. I'm really looking forward to it, and I will pass you over to Katie Cullen-Birtwessel. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks. The next slide, please. Great, thank you. So hi everybody. Thanks for the introduction, and really pleased to be here as always. I've facilitated a few of these wellbeing webinars for Foothold now, and always enjoy it. Today's going to be even more enjoyable because I'm going to be joined by Claire, my colleague, at the end to do a bit of a Q&A and conversation. So hopefully bringing to life some of the information that I'm going to start off giving you as the first part of the session. So as Catherine said, an important topic, like all of these topics are, and you know, can be quite challenging. So yeah, as Catherine said already, just look after yourself if this does resonate a little bit, but hopefully you'll find the session helpful and informative. So I've already been introduced, so I don't really need to go through my background, but I am a psychotherapist and a mediator actually, so that's quite important in this subject. So I have had that first-hand experience in kind of managing conflict in the workplace. The next slide, please. So the first part of today is obviously me just going through a few slides with some information to look at what types of conflict you might encounter in the work environment, to understand that the impact that it can have on you as an individual as well as your organisation, and to increase your awareness of strategies to resolve conflict at work and understand your boundaries, and that will come up a bit more hopefully in the conversation that I have with Claire as well. So as I said already, kind of bringing that to life. The next slide. So quite often I always start with a definition on the subject that I'm talking about, just to give it a little bit of context really in relation to what we then go on, or what I then go on to say. So according to the dictionary, the definition of conflict: an active disagreement between people with opposing opinions or principles. And there can be three different components of workplace conflict. Behavioural refers to an action or something that you are going to do that can impact the feelings or emotions of another person. The cognitive refers to a disagreement between the parties and reflects a discrepancy between interests, needs or objectives. So remember, this is in the context obviously of work, the workplace. And affective refers to feelings, for example, negative emotional states associated with the experience of conflict at work. So the idea obviously is to understand that those components make up will then mean that somebody is experiencing or having those experiences of workplace conflict. And it's important to kind of think as well that this isn't, although conflict can sometimes lead to bullying and harassment, and for those of you that listened to my session on bullying and harassment last month, you know, conflict, as Catherine said at the beginning, can be healthy. It quite often is healthy. It's good to be able to kind of disagree with somebody and have a healthy conversation around that. Of course, when that gets skewed, then that's when we need to think about how we manage it. Next slide, please. So when we consider workplace conflict, it can sometimes be useful to think about the types of conflict, and you may have, you know, examples in your mind when we kind of outline each type, and because sometimes this obviously does resonate with people when we're talking about this subject. So interpersonal, what we mean by that is conflict between people. So for example, a disagreement on work allocation, for example. And intrapersonal is the conflict within the individual which they're aware of. So, for example, wanting to achieve more than they're able to, but only being able to do a certain amount. So, for example, wanting to achieve 2 or more competing goals, but only actually having the time frame to complete one goal. Oh, I didn't need to say next slide, please. Thank you, Catherine. Okay. So generally speaking, researchers agree that workplace conflict arises from 2 main sources: tasks and relationships. So when we think about task conflict, this refers to conflict over things like typical working policies, distribution of resources, preferences in approaches or ways of completing a task. So the conflict is obviously all around the task that needs to be achieved within the workplace. And of course, relationship conflict refers to the conflict stemming from differences in personality or emotionally charged interventions with others. So it's really important and helpful to kind of think about the type of conflict that you're experiencing, because of course that's going to inform your method of resolution, because they obviously are quite different, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A section with myself and Claire at the end of this section. So what are the potential causes of workplace conflict? And as with any list, it's never exhaustive. These are just the main points really, and there often are other points that people might have, but these are what we would deem to be the main potential causes of workplace conflict. So unclear job roles, generally speaking, people have a preference for clarity. We need to know what we're doing and why we're doing that. Having those kind of clear job descriptions, being transparent, understanding what our boundaries are within work, what we're responsible for, what we're not responsible for. So of course, if those become skewed, that can be difficult and potentially can cause conflict. An increased workload can be a source of conflict, especially if perhaps that hasn't been communicated very well by senior managers, for example, or unfairly distributed workload, an unmanageable time frame to do the workload in. So everything connected to kind of the workload that you're having to manage. Disparities in pay, of course, an obvious one, especially when somebody's doing a similar job role, when things have perhaps changed within a workplace and somebody else has started on a different banding, for example. I've certainly had that type of communication in some of the mediations I've done, which has been quite difficult because of course those decisions have been made higher up. So of course that can, and when people find out, as you know, in offices things tend to go round in organisations, then that can obviously cause some upset and conflict. Access to opportunities with regards to kind of training, development, promotions, for example, perhaps that lack of equal opportunities, and a different access for different people sometimes within organisations can often cause that conflict. Poor and inconsistent management. So being treated fairly by a manager is really important, and if you're perceived as not, or you're experiencing, not being supported in that consistent way, then that's going to impact your relationship with that manager and potentially your relationship with other colleagues, so causing that issue there. Personality clashes, which is probably the biggest cause of workplace conflict, and certainly as my role as a mediator was something that came up a lot. Personalities can exert a strong influence in the workplace, where people have different traits and dispositions, how they do their job, how they respond to other colleagues, how they respond to different challenges, and particularly perhaps when somebody new starts in a team or in an organisation as well. Communication styles, obviously a big issue as well. People communicate in different ways. Some people obviously are a lot more direct, some people are more passive in their communication, and when things are misinterpreted, of course, that can often cause problems. And then finally, differences in morals, values, opinions and attitudes. Obviously, inevitably, when working with a diverse mix of individuals, it's natural for people to have opposing views and differing views that can directly and indirectly influence situations in the workplace, and so therefore can cause conflict. And it's really important to remember that although these have been presented as sources of conflict in the workplace, the reality is that we are all individuals with different experiences that can influence what we perceive as conflict. The next slide, please. So how can the impact of conflict present itself both from a personal perspective as an individual and obviously from an organisational? So there's quite a few points on both sides there. Of course, when it comes to how it can impact us personally, it's obviously going to impact our mental and emotional well-being. So we may experience, feeling depressed. We might have some anxiety, some anger quite often, and some frustration, especially if a resolution hasn't been found or we haven't been able to work out what we need to do to kind of resolve any conflict. Anything to do with our mental health and emotional well-being is then going to potentially impact on other things such as sleep, maybe having those panic attacks, feeling really anxious, obviously can lead to that, having burnout and feeling stressed and fatigued, because when we're holding our emotions for a long time, that often can make us feel tired, make us feel fatigued. And the dissatisfaction with our life, with our job, of course, because we're talking specifically today about the workplace, and having that kind of lack of motivation as well. And from an organisational perspective, of course, when somebody's in conflict and potentially, off work, so there's obviously going to, be perhaps a higher sick absence, higher rate of people being off work. Above average staff turnover, especially if conflict isn't dealt with, and I've certainly worked within organisations where that sadly has been the case, when there's potentially some issues in one particular part of the organisation that causes a lot of conflict. So of course then people don't stay, they leave. You're not going to feel so committed, you're not going to be so productive, and there's going to be sort of poor morale and employee relations as well. And those kind of counterproductive behaviours, because when we're feeling frustrated, when we're feeling angry, then of course that all impacts how we behave in work. The next slide, please. So how can we try to prevent conflict, so having that kind of conflict resolution? There may be written policies which provide guidance in resolving conflict that generally are available from HR, from human resources. But there is some research that has noted that there seems to be sometimes an over-reliance on these procedural approaches to managing conflict rather than focusing on developing those interpersonal skills of managers sometimes. So the idea obviously is, as much as possible, is to try and have that open communication in the workplace, within your teams, with your colleagues, with your managers. If you are a manager, obviously really getting to know your team. And of course there's a challenge still with working remotely for a lot of people in doing that. I mean, of course, in the height of COVID, that was really a big challenge. There is more obviously flexibility now to meet people in person, but it's still the way that we've worked now, of course, has changed hugely since the pandemic. And making sure, you know, that you have those kind of regular check-ins, that open communication, providing that what we'd call a kind of psychological safe space in the workplace, so that people feel able to bring their whole selves to work, you know, bring their ideas, share them without that kind of fear of judgment. So really, you know, the prevention, I guess, needs to really come from the top. The next slide. And this is just a template, I suppose, of a conflict resolution framework, which can be quite helpful just to consider. And of course, each section: carefully listen, appraise, problem solve, and then the next steps is the ideal way of implementing the framework. So it's important to, of course, listen to what the issue is, you know, and you know, practice that active listening, so that you kind of reflect back what you've heard without that kind of judgment, especially if you're, you know, really this is for from the manager's perspective, of course. Considerately look at the situation when it comes to appraising it. Try to remain impartial and stay calm. Manage your own kind of emotional reactions, so that you can, you know, especially if you're in that management or leader position, that, you know, you're able to, again, you know, by practicing that kind of active listening, that you can take a bit of a step back. And of course, you know, when people have been heard, then after that we can think about what the action plan might be. And of course, that might be quite difficult to work out what the best way forward is. You might not be able to do that on your own as a manager. You might need some extra support through HR, or potentially you know, through mediation, for example. And of course, it can be really tempting to think if something has been resolved, that's the end of it. And thinking back to the slide previously, the next steps are about kind of keeping that communication going, keeping those regular check-ins going, so that you can make sure that the conflict doesn't happen again, if you've been, you know, lucky enough to be able to find a resolution to it. And then my kind of final slide before I bring Claire in to talk a little bit more about that. And of course, people might have some questions themselves as well. You know, of course, we need to think about our boundaries depending on our role and where we are in that in an organisation, for example. You know, of course, human resources, HR support are there with frameworks, maybe similar to the one that I just shared, and you know, their own policies and procedures in managing conflict. as well as, you know, there might be some specialist guidance and advice on legal matters that might be there, some specific kind of admin arrangements, especially if there's going to be any kind of formal meetings. You know, how is that going to be minuted, for example? You know, how is that going to take place, and who's going to kind of liaise between the person that perhaps is in the conflict? So sometimes trade unions are obviously involved, again depending on what the nature of the situation. From my perspective as a mediator, I always used to describe and continue to describe mediation as a kind of formal informal process, which I know sounds a little bit contradictory, but quite often I would not write any you know, notes whilst we were doing the mediation, because the healing part of a mediation is hopefully when people are together and able to kind of share what's gone on for them, and when you try and write that up afterwards, it's virtually impossible actually, because the kind of, as I said, the healing part of that is in that actual meeting. And as long as you kind of practice those next steps and keep the communication going and having check-ins, then hopefully you know, that resolution intervention has been really helpful. So I hope this has given a little bit of an understanding, you know, just some information really about conflict. And I am delighted to bring in Claire, my colleague. Hi Claire. and we will hopefully bring this to life a little bit, so that it's not too much of a just me talking at everyone with slides, which is what normally happens. So this is exciting to have it a little bit differently.
That was really interesting and really insightful. Thank you so much, Katie. We've had a few questions come through actually, but I've got a few of my own first, if that's okay. So yeah, so a couple from me, and then we'll go through the questions that we've received from the participants today. So really interested in the mediation role. So are you able to share with us perhaps a real life example of what that might look like, and maybe one with a really positive outcome?
Yeah, they mostly have been positive, I have to say. I've done a couple that didn't work, but in the various mediations, and I've done quite a few, they've all been positive. I'm a big believer in it. It's a future focused exercise. You know, it's all about trying to find a solution for both parties. But yes, I did work with I won't share the name of the organisation obviously, but I did work with a manager and an employee. So that's quite an interesting mediation to do, because there is that kind of natural imbalance, I suppose, if you like, when somebody is a manager and somebody is the employee. And the employee had been off work. She had some health issues, and there was just a general kind of breakdown in their communication. Communication had started was mainly over email, and emails were kind of being misinterpreted. So the manager thought that the employee was not really taking much responsibility, and the employee was feeling that the manager wasn't really understanding or being very kind of empathic about her situation. And so my role, I guess, as a mediator was luckily they both agreed to meet in person, and the employee was feeling better by this stage as well, and so was able to attend a kind of in-person mediation. And my role obviously was to see both of them first individually, kind of get their side of things, then we kind of all met together. And I guess really what happened was, it was all a kind of around misinterpreting emails, how things were read, you know, what was actually really being said, perhaps a bit of clarity about their roles as well. So, you know, the manager not necessarily quite understanding that it would have been helpful to have offered a bit more support to the employee. There was an employee assistance program, there was occupational health, you know, those things were then kind of implemented, but also the employee perhaps being a bit clearer about what was going on for her, what she needed. So it was just because they'd stopped talking really, you know, in a nutshell. And that's so, I mean, that's one example of, I would say 99% of my mediations were around that, really, that issue. So
and a breakdown in communication,
yeah,
and people potentially misreading
yeah
messages and communications. And I think that's one key thing around emails.
Yeah.
Is that they can say different things to different people, and it's so easy to read between the lines and perhaps see something that's not there, or misinterpret something that is there.
Exactly.
So I don't know about you, but I'm a great believer in it. Sometimes if you receive something and you're uncertain, or you think that there's an undertone, just pick up the phone, or if you're in an office environment, just go over and tap someone and say, "Oh, can I just grab you quickly for 5 minutes?" I think that's a great preventative thing to do. But it's far easier to have a conversation with somebody and start to resolve the situation at a really early stage, because emails start going back and forth, and then before you know it, you're in quite a difficult, precarious position with somebody. So no, that's brilliant. Towards the beginning of the presentation, you differentiated between task conflict and relationship conflict. So is the former potentially easier to resolve? And if so, why might that be?
Yeah, I guess so, because like I said in the presentation, most organisations will have kind of policies and processes to follow, so that, you know, the tasks are being completed. You know, sometimes if it's done properly, you know, like obviously performance management might need to be implemented, you know, along with, you know, perhaps with intervention from HR, or there's kind of mitigating circumstances there, you know, occupational health might be involved to kind of get those tasks done. So I think, that task conflict, it can be a bit uncomfortable, and I suppose can sometimes, you know, obviously be also connected to kind of personality and relationship conflict. So they're a bit linked, I suppose, really. But I would say, yes, generally the task conflict is easier to manage than perhaps the relationship conflict, because, you know, I guess, as we all know, you know, it can be hard sometimes to understand where someone's coming from if they're different from us.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my role as a coach, I've experienced lots of issues around ethics and diversity. What part does this play in conflict resolution?
Yeah, I think I sort of like hinted at that a little bit in the presentation. Really, you know, it's obviously really important that we take into account in the workplace kind of any sort of ethical frameworks that we might work with, you know, and policies that are around to protect everybody, you know, protected characteristics, if you like, when it comes to sort of, you know, diversity and ethics. And I suppose, you know, everybody does. It's really hard, because we are obviously all different, and, you know, sometimes a kind of healthy debate for somebody, they might really, you know, find that they like it, they enjoy it, you know, they don't mind having that kind of, you know, healthy conflict, I suppose. But for other people, that's really, you know, that might be quite challenging, that might be quite anxiety provoking. So I guess there needs to be that sort of understanding of where we all come in terms of our, you know, backgrounds, and diverse backgrounds, understanding our kind of biases, you know, both conscious and unconscious, because, you know, I think that's also, you know, really important to kind of take into consideration. So yeah, I think probably like you said, you know, that's what, you know, you always have to consider that when you're doing your work as a coach as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. We've had some great questions, so I think I'm going to start by putting those questions to you that have come in today. So the first person has said, I get nervous that if I say no at work, I'll be putting my job at risk. My contract says I can expect extra jobs to help the company. So if I say no, I worry I'm in breach of contract. How would you respond to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, if it's possible, I would say perhaps, you know, by expressing your anxiety around, you know, what about saying no, and how can that be managed? I mean, again, I guess it is as much as it can be about how you you know, you perhaps approach that manager or approach the person that's asking you to do those things, and finding out if there's some kind of middle ground potentially, because I guess if it is in your contract to do that, then I guess that's needed for the organisation, but there might be something that can be done kind of in the middle, so that you're, you know, that you're also feeling you know, able to do that and not being pushed too much.
I think a lot of people have difficulty saying no.
Yeah, they do.
It's really hard skill to master sometimes, because we often tend to put other people before ourselves, so we just think that should be the response. But actually, sometimes in terms of our own well-being, as long as we caveat that no with the appropriate information and we explain the rationale behind it, I think that can be a really positive thing to do, to kind of say, actually, I can't do that. It could be a no, I can't do that today, but I can do it tomorrow.
Exactly.
I can't do that for these particular reasons. Somebody else might be able to pick this up. So I think there's lots of people who that question will resonate with. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So our next question, our HR rep is really friendly with everyone, so I don't want to go to them. Who else can I go to over an ongoing issue?
Yeah, that's quite tricky. Maybe another manager, you know, maybe not your direct. It depends what the situation is, obviously, and I'm not going to, obviously I don't know that. Sometimes other managers in an organisation can be a helpful person to go to. There might be a mental health first aid, although they will generally signpost on, so they can't really kind of get involved in that. So I would say maybe if there's another type of manager that, you know, it's hard to answer it without knowing what the issue is, but that would be my sort of next port of call, really.
This is quite a tricky one.
Yeah, especially if there's only one HR person, if that's unless there's somebody else within HR. Again, it depends how big the HR you know, department is.
I suppose any manager could give some advice and guidance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next one, so what, this is an interesting one. So what can I do because I work in a family company? So if I go to the chief executive officer with a problem, I'm basically talking about someone's dad, son or friend. That's a really interesting one, isn't it?
Oh gosh, these are putting me on the spot, aren't they? My goodness.
That's a tricky one, yeah.
I again, I mean, boundaries are so important, even if it is a family run business, because you still need to have that be able to go to, you know, those people with any kind of issue. And I think it's a really interesting one, actually, because I think it doesn't always necessarily just have to be family, friends. I think it can be, you know, when we work with people that we then become friends with, how do we then challenge them when we need to? And you know, I'm a big believer, I guess, in trying to sort of promote, I mentioned it already, kind of psychological safety, and, you know, promoting that kind of workplace culture where people are able to make mistakes without fear of, you know, being, you know, hauled over the coals for it. You know, being able to share their ideas, be creative, without that kind of judgment. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Claire and I are very lucky in where we work, that we have that psychological safe space, don't we? So, you know, that's which is really great. So I'm a real believer in that. Have I answered the question? I don't know, really.
I think so. There's also the thing for me is, I think you can say, I believe that you can say anything to anyone as long as you say it in the right way.
That's true.
So as long as it's presented in the right way, it's sometimes it could be a case of it's how you position something. So you could be, rather than seem to be telling tales, or you feeling like you're expressing it in that way, you could go to someone saying, look, I'm having this difficulty at the moment with a colleague. I'm coming to you for help because I really want to resolve this situation in the best way that I possibly can. So just almost trying to put a positive spin on it, and let the person that you're talking to know that you're trying to seek a resolution, and you want to solve this problem, and you potentially need some help solving this problem. It is a difficult one, but I think the presentation of that and how that discussion is, and maybe just putting some thought in before having that discussion as to the right types of language, and how you might respond in terms of what gets fed back as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, actually. Language is really important, isn't it? Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more, if that's okay, Katie.
Yeah.
So Chris has commented, I wonder if entrenched conflicts start when we are open to new ideas or critical thinking, or simply don't have the time for that. Perhaps the mediation space brings that about. I also think that in traditional work cultures, what is intended as healthy conflict is regarded disobedience.
Yeah, let me just reread that as well. Sometimes it's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big question.
When we aren't. Yeah.
Lots in that question as well, isn't there? There's lots of different things.
Yeah, and I guess the mediation can, give that space to reflect on where we're at, because change, I guess I'm reading that a little bit around how we manage change as well, how change is kind of communicated in organisations, because I think that can often be quite unsettling for people. So when we're thinking about kind of new ideas, then and somebody's not necessarily open to that because they're a bit fearful of it. So I guess there's, that potentially can sometimes lead to a bit of conflict when we're, a bit defensive sometimes, which we can all get into that place when something is new and we're not quite sure about it really. So I think and traditional work cultures, so I guess what we're and I think that, I mean, that's an interesting one. Like we've said, what constitutes kind of healthy conflict for one person might be, somebody else might experience that as being really sort of like direct and full on sort of thing. I think that's always an interesting one really, and maybe disobedience, which it shouldn't be. That's what when I keep sort of going on about this psychological safe spaces, it's around not being criticized for having a different opinion, as long as you're being fair and ethical and not discriminatory.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie.
Okay,
Catherine, I'm going to pass back over to you to do the finishing piece.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Claire and Katie. That was brilliant. I think it really helped to have that discussion. There were some quite challenging questions, definitely. Some very well, a couple that I even think, well, I think I've been in a similar situation like that. I think when you're working closely with people, it can be quite difficult, and you can almost feel like you're telling on someone, and it's that culture of I don't want to upset people, but I do want to resolve a situation. So I think psychological safety is so important. Thank you very much for that conversation, and thank you everyone who's been watching for joining in today's Foothold webinar. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our next upcoming webinar, which it would be great if you could join us for in the new year. So we've got Move More in 2024, exploring the small steps we can all take to improve our fitness in the new year. So this is we all say new year, new me and things like that, but I think what's important to remind ourselves is that feeling like we have to make those changes or feeling ashamed of how we are now isn't fertile ground for change. And the best way to change anything in your life is to give yourself compassion for where you're at now and think, well, what would I like to improve and what are the small ways I can do that? So this is what this webinar is all about. And we'll be speaking to a woman who has actually done that. She, in her 40s, just decided to make a change and join a fitness class, and from there has gone into a huge career and done all kinds of accreditations in various kinds of fitness and classes. So very interesting. So that's on the 16th of January, and we would love to see you there. That's at midday. You can register for free on our website, or you can scan the QR code there on the screen. So, oh, I should mention actually our producer who's on the stream now will also drop our feedback form into the Q&A tab, which is in the top right corner. So any feedback you've got for this webinar would be fantastic. And we would also love if you could support Foothold in any other way. So I know I mentioned if anyone would be able to generously donate, that would be wonderful and gratefully received, but you can get involved to help us raise funds or deliver our services in various ways. So you could take part in a fundraising challenge. We have a challenge coming up. I'm trying to remember. It's a fitness one. I think it's walking the Isle of Wight, but it's on our website and my colleagues have been talking about it. I have a very young baby, so that's my get out of that one, to be honest. You could also become a volunteer. We have lots of volunteers and in all kinds of areas of the business. You don't have to have an engineering background to be a volunteer, and you can help us with our work at Foothold. Or if you have an idea for a fundraising event you'd like to get involved with yourself, you would like to set up yourself, we can give you some tools to organise one, and it can all be done by getting in touch with us. So if you go to myfoothold.org/get involved, or the QR code takes you to that page, then we can have a discussion about how you can help us and we can work together. And the last thing is you can connect with us by going onto our website. So that's myfoothold.org. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram on all of these. And you can give us a call. So you can either call us if you're interested in getting involved with us as a charity, but you can also call if you require support. And that's for people from the engineering community and your families. So if you have any concerns, if there is any way that we can support you in any of the ways discussed previously, housing, mental and physical health, legal, etc., then please get in touch. And you can also email contact.us@myfoothold.org. So that is everything. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again to Katie and Claire for having that really important discussion and looking at ways that you can manage conflict healthily in the workplace. And we really look forward to seeing you in the new year. Have a lovely Christmas, have lovely New Year's celebrations, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thanks everyone.